and interpretation of foreign policy positions to the people of India and the world beyond is ingrained in our conditioning as diplomats who are citizens of a staunchly democratic nation. Public diplomacy is the vehicle for dissemination of the ideas, the interests, the concepts, and the approaches that define our foreign policy and the defense of our national interest as we further our bilateral relationships and our policies in multilateral forums. Its aim is to enable comprehension and understanding of the positions we adopt, the rationale that propels this, and to fulfill the need to inform and enable growing transparency in the articulation of foreign policy, given the fact that the constituencies that we address are diverse, ranging from foreign and domestic audiences to non-governmental agencies, educational institutions, experts and analysts on foreign affairs, to generalist groups, and of course the media, print, electronic, and net-based. In essence, I believe public diplomacy is a public good for the public good. Public diplomacy relies as much on the spoken word as the written word, and indeed, of course, on the visual image, the powerful visual image. And by the very definition of this strand of diplomacy, it depends on clarity of presentation, the ability to persuade, to influence, and to mold opinions in a manner that is not propaganda, but rather presents the case for any given aspect of foreign policy in a clear, cogent, factual, and communicative manner. We live in a communications environment, and if our policies are to be well understood, we will have to interact on a real-time and virtually constant basis with the media and audiences, both at home and abroad. Public diplomacy is also a process of reinvention for many of us as bureaucrats because of the value it places on communication skills and the need to feel the popular pulse, the requirements of innovation, using the latest information and communication technologies, of moving beyond precedent-driven approaches. It requires us to think out of the box, be alert to countering negative information and stereotypes, and also, and this is very important, to be ever vigilant of information vacuums that will be filled by our adversaries. It goes without saying that the contours of public diplomacy are being constantly expanded. As our foreign policy interests and strategic perspectives become more sharply honed, as our global presence becomes much more visible, as India's re-emergence grasps the world's attention, and as our economy becomes one of the international front-runners in terms of its accelerated growth rate, India's voice must be heard in multiple situations before diverse audiences, and the task to fulfill this will be that of its diplomats, who must be ever active in the tasks of advocating and explaining the Indian brand, as it were, because this is a compelling narrative surrounding the world's largest democracy that must be heard. Of course, the challenge we face today is that because there are a plethora, you may call it a babel of voices outside government that speak on foreign policy, it necessarily follows that we are not heard so easily. Our message simply may not get through. The way to address this is to provide higher definition to the debate by presenting the government's case as clearly and factually as possible, being quick to correct misrepresentation, bridging gaps in information, and to understand that by hesitating to speak, we only compound the lack of understanding of a particular policy in the public domain. It is important to pay attention to feedback and to engage with a broad spectrum of audiences. By listening and by engaging, we stand a better chance of being heard. Public diplomacy, as we all know, is no abstract term. It is a real-world phenomenon, and it overlaps with our cultural diplomacy, our outreach to academic institutions, the promotional work that our chambers of business and industry engage in to promote Brand India, and the work of the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, the Ministries of Culture and of Tourism. The projection of India's soft power, I know that the term soft power attracts a great deal of comment. We were at a meeting with some of our esteemed parliamentarians the other day, and one of them ventured to suggest that instead of soft power, we should use the word soul power, which is really India's special quality. So soft power or soul power, it's very much a part of the processes of public diplomacy. So too, the use of social media, including Facebook and Twitter, YouTube, and the Web 2.0 platform, among others. This is because we also need to understand the demographics of the audiences we address. The idiom must be tailored to cater also to the language that the younger sections of our population speak. The promotion and projection of India is furthered by our public diplomacy division through our publications, India Perspectives was mentioned, documentary films, and selections of popular and classical music that can be used by our diplomatic missions to project India. When I was ambassador in China, a Chinese language magazine that we brought out, which was India Today, basically in Chinese, reached out to thousands, hundreds of thousands of Chinese, and it was one of the most popular publications that any embassy in Beijing put out. And that really spoke about the power of India to attract attention and to tweak the imagination of our audiences wherever they are. We're also increasingly aware of the need to emphasize our image as a country that embraces diversity with its secular ethos and its vibrant democracy, as also our determination to resist terrorism and militancy and the forces that threaten our sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this connection, our public diplomacy efforts must and indeed do focus on the composite nature of our culture, our interreligious harmony, our emphasis on inclusive, integrative growth, especially when it comes to our outreach in our neighborhood, in Southeast Asia, in the Gulf countries, and in Africa. The face of Indian diplomacy is acquiring a new expression today with our growing capability to partner a number of countries in our neighborhood, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean in socio-economic development. We see the need for audiences abroad particularly to be made more aware of our technical and economic cooperation programs and our grant assistance and concessional lines of credit to a number of countries. The revival of an irrigation project that has doubled Senegal's rice output and made the country self-sufficient in rice for the first time in a generation, a power transmission project that is helping take surplus electricity from Côte d'Ivoire to Mali. Ghana has established a regional center for excellence in information technology and a state-of-the-art presidential complex. Mauritius has an entire IT park. These are dozens of examples that I'd like to cite which speak of the outreach and the assistance that we've been able to extend and work hand in hand with our friends and partners in Africa. We currently extend lines of credit of over US $10 billion to countries in Africa and elsewhere, but they hardly find a mention in either the Indian or the international media. Similarly, the excellent development work that we have done for the people of Afghanistan under constant threat from terrorist forces needs to be explained to the world. We have traditionally, in the bureaucracy, tended to adopt a fairly conservative approach towards publicizing our own work, and this almost by default leaves the field open for negative stories of which, unfortunately, there is never a dearth. From a public diplomacy standpoint, I think it is vital that we start building credible and engaging narratives about the positive work that we do. These would not only provide global audiences with a perspective of the geographical spread and the impact of our development partnerships, but also afford our own public and Parliament with an appreciation of our activities. Yet another aspect on which public diplomacy needs to focus is crisis management in extraordinary situations, getting the government's message out and addressing public opinion directly with the purpose of informing, reassuring, and enabling sober and well-reasoned responses that are bereft of rumor and speculation. I cannot but emphasize this factor as one that should constantly be in the viewfinder of every diplomat and practitioner of foreign policy. Careful planning, the capacity to anticipate situational requirements, the needs of the public to be informed in real time, to avoid critical delays in dissemination of information, the identification of both resources and resource persons, the choice of spokespersons, are all issues that require focus. I also wish to focus on what I call the domestication of foreign policy. And this is where I believe public diplomacy, public affairs, and public relations cross-fertilize each other. One of the key initiatives that we have taken in recent months focuses on creating a more informed discourse on foreign policy issues within our own country. We recognize that many of these issues are increasingly intertwined with domestic agendas, and as a democracy, we cannot avoid the responsibility of communicating our position more effectively to key segments of public opinion. Since its start in February this year, our MEA Distinguished Lecture Series on India's foreign policy has touched 24 different university campuses, virtually all of them outside Delhi. The topics for the lectures are selected by the universities, and the lectures are delivered by retired ambassadors with domain knowledge of the particular topic. The lively interactive sessions that accompany these lectures, the presence of local media, and the participation of civil society have made this program an important component of our public diplomacy efforts. A related program that has a strong domestic focus pertains to the seminars, the conferences, and workshops on foreign policy themes that we support and organize. Our conferences on Indo-Nepal relations in Patna and Varanasi and on India's Look East policy in Shillong and Guwahati are examples of our conscious endeavor